It is after midnight of this new day, January 23rd, 2010, Saturday. I would like to engage in something that is dangerous. In order to renounce it, it quite disturbs me. I got a candle back there, so I think that's pretty. That's the only point of that. Sometimes I like to use candles because it's a nice eye catcher. I think that's visible. Yeah. And so it's just for aesthetic reasons. And that's a smell too. It's olfactory reasons. I'd like to get into the dangerous attitude I see among Christians. And I don't believe it's exclusively among Christians, but Pharisees as well, or Pharisees of all stripes. Pharisaical type. No, non-Pharisees, but the Pharisees, metaphorically, basically the same type of attitude. And that is, we're rejecting that because it doesn't fit our paradigm. If God doesn't switch your paradigm, I don't know what the heck you think God is for. Paul tried to change people's minds. And then after they were Christians, he continued to try to change their minds. Because he was good, because he was a good man and did what was right. And so I've got the scriptures here. They're beautiful. This is, see that, Proverbs. It's some introductory commentary, which is, to some degrees, somewhat extraneous. Even though it's brief. It's, that part before the line there. See the line there. So, people are engaging in this, no, stop, I don't want to hear, I can't hear that. And we've even got worldly people saying that if you say the wrong things, George Bush was big into that. And Barack Obama has signed off again on what we call in the United States the Patriot Act. And what some of us call in the United States the Treasonous Act. See, you're talking about treason and all that stuff, and who's treasonous. It almost sounds like we're hovering back to the founding of the United States, where there's, I will say, contentious men and others, men, women, and boys and girls, and people with the wrong attitude. And yet, even though they accept ungodliness within their own religious cadres or set of ideas, whether they be Christian or non, is a closed-mindedness. So I want to read from the scriptures a plea to be open-minded. As they were open-minded with Paul, that's how they became Christians. And not only Paul, but his fellow worker Titus, who has good testimony by Paul in the book of Titus. His fellow worker Timothy, who was particularly dear to Paul and close to Paul, as were Titus. As were, if you read the scriptures, Priscilla and Aquila, although maybe not as much ado made about them, etc. But they had to be open-minded to accept Paul's message. And we have to be open-minded to continue to learn as Paul teaches us, or John teaches us, and hopefully God teaches us. Not how to count our fingers and toes and where our own ideology is found in the scriptures, but learning from that rather than reading it like a bookworm that, these people that get into the scriptures that do not understand the Holy Scriptures, the Bible, they boast very much about their loss in a compendium of papers. And, Paul was crucified, quote unquote, note the quote fingers, crucified, both hands here, crucified, almost, was sought to be crucified, was sought to be slaughtered for his interpretation of the scriptures. And I believe that people are ignorant in the fact that when somebody makes waves, just like Jesus did, just like Paul did, just like Titus did, just like Timothy did, these people are completely despised. There was a writer, I'm trying to think of his name, considered, the church fathers by the Catholics. I believe it was Pliny, who was after the canon of the Bible. and it's not considered canonical, but not considered part of this is the Bible. But outside the Bible, they said they think we're eating flesh and drinking blood. Does that sound familiar to you today? When you hear, without sorting them out, it doesn't really matter who they are. You know, Paul said, who they are doesn't matter to me, you know. But that was a quote from what Paul said. And he said, they're eating flesh and drinking blood because they ate bread and drank probably an alcoholic beverage. And then people, unless you're Catholic or perhaps Lutheran, I don't know how Lutherans work. People always flip out about, well, it's got to be non-alcoholic. Jesus turned water into wine. Well, it wasn't really wine. It's mistranslated, or it was non-alcoholic wine. It had just a little bit of alcohol in it, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, you must guard, if you are to be a faithful follower of Christ, against this crap and hit the issue, which is love and Christ and salvation. It's all the same thing. Christ was God's Son. He loved. God was loved. The Bible says it's exact representation of what God is like. So if you want to be the Three Stooges, then you're not being an exact representation of what God is like. And I want to really get into you this idea, this concept, that rather than throwing up your hands and saying it's unscriptural, you might say, well, I got to put insurance on my car, and somebody say it's not the scriptures, or you say I'm going to drive my car. They say it's not scriptural. Jesus rode on a donkey and all this stuff, and Jesus did a lot of things that we won't do today. Are our lives unscriptural? See, the bigger issues. Jesus said, "You strain out the gnat, but swallow the camel," and I must be careful not to sin again against the Lord, for I have sinned against the Lord before, as you have, as we all have, and get like that. Jesus' problem with the Pharisees is they would not receive him. So don't you be Jews that do not receive your own Christ, or Christians who do not receive your own God, or the counsel of Christ, the counsel of God, the counsel of Paul, because, the super apostles have come. Paul spoke about the super apostles, and he said, please listen to what I have to say. I don't consider myself least among these super apostles, these so-called super apostles. Consider what I have to say. Again, Paul said, he was talking about women are to wear long hair, and this is something that people just flip out about, even, which is natural in the world, because it's not for them. But as for the Christian, they flip out about, men should have short hair and women should have long hair. And I can just imagine, somebody said, well, does your hair have ponytails, Mark, or not have ponytails, or do you have, did you dye your hair or whatever? Which is, once again, I'm talking about again and again and again, people affront this stuff with ridiculous nonsense. So here I read the scriptures. Proverbs, and it's right down here, first page, first book. The Proverbs of Solomon. Will you heed him? The son of David, king of Israel. The light's not the best. To know wisdom and instruction. So, it's so you learn something. It's so you know wisdom and instruction. It's not so you quote it per se. To discern the sayings of understanding. Okay, does that include just Solomon's sayings? Or does that include just people we accept? We must discern sayings of understanding. Whether we can corroborate it to the Bible, because that was the problem with Jesus. They said, you're unscriptural to Jesus. And they say the same thing of people of Christ today. And, there are people out there, the Amish in our country, we call them the Amish, and they refuse to drive cars. And they refuse to use house-provided electricity. I think most of them, if not all of them. And you say, okay, instead of saying, wait a minute, you're not living the right way because you should live in a modern way. You should fit in with society and serve God that way. And then some people will say, no, they're right. You must discern here to know wisdom and instruction, You must see the situation, gather it, and try to apply it to Christianity, to Christ, to the Bible. So where you flip somewhere in the scriptures, you can gain something rather than saying quote, end quote. That's not good. And then drawing some obvious conclusions or some obviously erroneous conclusions, some wrong conclusions. To know wisdom and instruction. To discern the sayings of understanding. To receive instruction in wise behavior. Righteousness, justice, and equity. To give prudence to the naive. To the youth knowledge and discretion. Yeah, that's about as far as I can go for one video. God bless you.